Hello everyone and welcome back to another video from the Francophile. It is Jalen and Maria and we hope you all are doing well. In today's video we are going to be talking about the top 10 differences between higher education in France and the United States. So for those of you that do not know, Maria and I are Americans living in France. We are TAPIF alumni. We are currently students at the Université de Reims Champagne-Ardenne. I study supply chain and logistics while Maria studies public law. So before we get started with the video, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and check us out on all of our social media. We do have our blog, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. And yeah, let's get into it. So everything that we're going to be referring to or talking about in this video is going to be based on our own experiences. We realize that people have different experiences all over the place, but we're going to be talking about what we've seen.
We went to a public university in the United States in Virginia for our undergrad degrees, and we are now in France at another public university doing our master's degrees. So that's kind of what we'll be pulling from for these differences. The first difference that we're going to point out is the large variety of higher education options that exist in France versus the United States.
In France, you have a lot of different things that you can do after high school that are considered higher education. Whereas in the United States, when you talk about higher education, you're kind of talking about like this sort of four-step process. You have like the associate's degree, you have a bachelor's, and then a master's, and then for some people they even go up to the doctorate level and get a PhD.
And that definitely exists here.
Yeah, that exists here as well, yeah, for sure.
It's still the classic model, but there's a lot of other in-between steps that you can take before, after, or during.
Yeah.
That, for example, you can do a year of preparatory school before you go to, for example, a 3-year undergrad degree. Or you can choose not to do that at all and go to somewhere that we would consider a trade school in America, but that here is considered part of the higher education program.
Yeah. So we've noticed here that like after high school, you have a lot more options and are encouraged to kind of do exactly what's right for you instead of kind of trying to fit into a very specific mold.
The second difference that we want to talk about today is the huge cost difference between France's higher ed and America's.
It's pretty normal, for example, for students to go into debt in America in order to finance their higher education, sometimes paying upwards of $20 or $30 or even more $1,000 per year. And that's for public school. But here in France, as two students who go to public school here, the cost is just astronomically cheaper. We paid both for our first year of our master's 243 euros. And that is just amazing to us. Obviously, here in France, there are options that are more expensive because there are private schools and business schools and, very specific pointed, higher education options. But for public school, definitely comparing the two, it's so much cheaper in France. So the third difference that we notice is that campus life doesn't exist in the same way. Here in France, we have noticed that school is really just about school. So you go there and you study and that's kind of it. They have like some basic services and events from time to time, but it's a huge difference from what we experienced during our undergrad in the United States, where there were always events happening on all parts of campus with food and all sorts of fun games, and then the services, there were tons of services. People will just kind of hang out on campus and they're just, relaxing, chilling with friends. That doesn't really happen as much here. Like we said, this could be one of the effects that the cost of education has on university life. I
also think that in the US, part of the college experience is being a big community, a big student body, whereas here it's more looked at as it's your individual schooling that you're concerned with, and so it's kind of, you're treated as individual students rather than a big community of happy
family.
Yeah, it's a big family of college students. It's more like you all come to class and then you all go home.
Yeah.
The fourth difference between French and American higher ed that we want to talk about is class. There's a few pretty big differences, and I think the first one would be the amount of class that we have in regards to the time we spend in class as well as the number of subjects that we take at a time.
Yeah.
So when we were in undergrad, we usually took about 5 to 6 subjects and we're in class for 12 to 13 hours a week. And the rest of our time was spent studying or doing homework on our own time. Here, we take 9 to 10 subjects and spend 28 to 32 hours in class per week.
Yeah.
So it's a huge difference as far as actual time that you're sitting in class and the amount of subjects that you have to learn for finals week, for example. In talking about this with my French friends, it's definitely a French specialty that even French people don't necessarily love, but it's definitely a huge time commitment compared to what we were used to in America.
For sure. So the fifth difference that we noticed about higher education is the fact that here in France, we haven't had to buy textbooks. Part of the American college experience is getting textbooks.
Yeah, coughing up a few $100 every semester or more if you're in sciences, for example.
Yeah, and that's something that we did, you know, when we were in university in the United States, we bought textbooks every single semester. But here in France, we haven't had to buy any textbooks. And the textbooks that, you know, teachers might use, they're offered in the library of the university. So that's just really nice. And, you know, if you do have required readings, for example, so far we've been given PDFs of articles or, you know, books or things like that instead.
Yeah. There's no bookstore on campus where the professors tell the people to stock their books. There's nowhere to buy books on our campus. It's the library or nothing, really.
Yeah.
And this is just our experience, of course, but we haven't bought a single textbook.
Nope, not one. So the sixth difference that we found is that in France, there's not really a school spirit. That was a big part of our undergraduate experience, having school spirit for the University of Mary Washington. And here at Université de la Champagne-Ardenne, there's no deep pride for going there. There's no sports really, there's no like our school versus your school rivalries or anything like that. So it's just like a totally different experience from what we were used to in the States. Kind of going off of the bookstore idea, usually in American universities, you buy like school merchandise in the bookstore, but since the bookstore doesn't exist here, there's none of that. So there's no sweatshirts and pencils and pens and all these sorts of things that you can do to show your school pride and your spirit. It's just not a thing here.
Nope. Difference number 7 is about residence life or dorm living on campus in France versus in the United States. This does vary from school to school in America, but in our experience, especially as two former resident assistants, and in my case as well as senior resident assistant, residence life was a huge part of our undergrad. Building community, living with people who go to school with you, even living in special communities of people who have to do with your studies or your interests, and organizing events with people that you live with, and hanging out with people inside of the residence halls. It's a huge part of what college is in America. However, here, very few schools even have on-campus housing. There are student residences, but they're generally all over town, and they're not really run like on-campus ones are in America, as I described. There's no RA, there's no community building events. It's really just a residence, pretty basic.
Yeah, the idea about like student housing here is kind of the cost of it. Like it's among the apartments in the city, and sometimes they're really close to campus, and even on campus, it's just that they just cost a lot less than, you know, typical apartments. Whereas, you know, in the United States, I don't think it's really about cost. It's more about the experience.
Yeah.
Our eighth difference in higher education in America versus higher education in France is required internships. So here in France, we have required internships in our master's degrees. For me, I have two. I have one in my first year of my master's, and then I have another one in the second year of my master's. And for you, you have...
I had one optional one in my first year, and I have one required one in my second.
Yeah, and these internships are really part of getting the degree or the diploma. You can't just skip them, and if you do, then you'll have to repeat the year, for example. Whereas in America, it wasn't necessarily part of the program, especially in the public schools that we knew about and went to. I'm sure that some programs in America have internships that are required, but on the whole, it's really a cultural thing here in France. I mean, kids start doing internships starting from middle school. A lot of times they're observation internships. They're not actually working, but you know, it's just it's in the French psyche and in the business community in France doing internships. So that was a big difference that we noticed.
The ninth difference that we have noticed has to do with the grading systems. Generally, in the United States, we use a 4.0 grading scale. It can vary, of course, depending on programs, whether you're in high school or in university, but 4.0 is generally the scale, with 4.0 being perfect and down from there. In France, they use a 20-point grading scale, with 20 being the best and on down from there.
Right.
One thing that is kind of hard to understand after you've grown up in America is that in France, on the 20-point grading scale, a 10 is a passing grade and what many students aim for. Which means that here, what you might consider passing, like a C, a lot of American students are disappointed in a C.
Right.
Whereas here, a C or a 10 is a great grade. It means that you've understood 50% of the material, which is a passing grade, and that means that you've done what you're supposed to be doing.
Exactly.
And then if you go up a little bit higher, an A would be around a 14, 15. And anything above that is stellar, just unbelievable. So it's practically impossible to get a 20. And even 19s, 18s, 17s are really, really rare and reserved for really amazing work. So in general, not only do we use different numbers to designate grades, but we also see grades differently as a culture, I think.
So our 10th and final difference that we're going to talk about is compensation et rattrapage. That roughly translates to grade averaging and retake exams. So in America, we're used to taking our classes, you try to pass them, and if you fail, then you fail. You can opt to retake the class if you need it for a major, for example, the next semester, but there is no retake exam once you failed the class. Whereas in France, that is the case, and you can do rattrapage if you didn't succeed in your compensation. So like we had just mentioned, a 10 out of 20 is a passing grade, and for example, you can use compensation or grade averaging to get to that 10 out of 20. So for example, if you have one class where you got a 12, and then one class where you got an 8, which is not passing grade, they actually average out together to become 10. And so you do pass the year.
So even if you have technically failed a class, you still get the credits, you've averaged it out. Whereas in the United States, if your GPA takes a hit, it takes a hit, but it doesn't release you from the obligation of passing a class. A good GPA doesn't fix a failed class, whereas here it does.
And I'll actually link down below something that you can read about compensation, because it's actually pretty complicated and many schools do it
slightly differently,
but that's kind of the idea behind it. And then for rattrapage, these are the retake exams that you have. So if you didn't succeed, like I said, there's a second session of exams that happen after the first, normal finals week that, we mentioned earlier. There's another session kind of in the summer where you can get, one more stab at it to try and pass your class.
So if you don't pass the class, you don't average your grades out to a 10, and you want to pass the year without retaking the whole year, then that's when you do the retake exams. And if you pass that time, there's no problems and you passed.
Right, and so I think this is kind of a product of the different systems because, you know, in France, like we said, you have so many subjects to take. You're in class for so long, there's so much information, and there's not as many assignments to do to kind of, you know, pad your grades up.
Right.
And so they kind of give you more chances on the back end to pass the year. So that was an interesting difference that we found between the two. So those are our top 10 differences between higher education in the United States and higher education in France. If you enjoyed this video, we do have other videos that are all about us doing our master's degrees here, so make sure you check out our playlist on master's degrees here on YouTube, and take a look at our website. We also have a tab on our website, our blog, about doing our master's degrees here. But yeah, other than that, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, check us out on all our social media. We do have our blog, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. And yeah.
If you have had the opportunity to participate in higher education in any way in 2 different countries, let us know down below some differences that you noticed, maybe that we didn't mention, or ones that you disagree with that we did mention.
Yeah. On that note, I guess we will see you all in 2 weeks.
Bye.
Bye.